I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Anastasia Kārkliņa Gabriel.
I am a researcher by training, and so I'm a very big believer in relying on data to help us understand what the consumers that we are serving expect of us, what they want, and what they will ultimately resonate with. And that part of integrating cultural research into market research processes, not as an afterthought, but as a core of this process, is something that I care about deeply in my work.
Dr. Anastasia Kārkliņa Gabriel is a cultural theorist and strategist specializing in inclusivity within marketing, media, and tech. Currently a senior insights lead at Reddit, Dr. Gabriel earned her doctorate in cultural studies from Duke University and consulted for the world's top brands at agencies like Wieden+Kennedy, Dentsu Creative, Kantar, and McCann New York. A lifelong activist, she helps brands ignite cultural innovation and leverage the power of media for good. She is the author of Cultural Intelligence for Marketers, Building an Inclusive Marketing Strategy, published by Kogan Page. My interview with Anastasia is coming right up. But first,
my dad works in B2B marketing, but I never really knew what that meant. Then one day my dad came by my school for career day and told everyone in my class he was a big ROAS man. Then he just kept saying things like, the bigger the ROAS, the better, over and over. My friends still laugh at me to this day. I think it means calculating a return on ad spend. One thing's for sure, I'll be known as the ROAS man's kid for the rest of my days. Why couldn't you just be a fireman or a lawyer? Why? You ruined my life, Dad.
Not everyone gets B2B, but LinkedIn has the people who do. And with ads on LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people based on job title, industry, likelihood to buy, and more. Start converting your B2B audience into high-quality leads today. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/MPN to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/MPN. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Keith Smith hosts a great podcast called The Fuel Podcast. Keith, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Fuel is all about the advertising business. It's like Mad Men for the ears. Every show, I pick on a hot topic to discuss or interview a celebrity from the world of British and American advertising. We chat about all sorts of things, and I try and uncover the real person behind the image using just my powerful charm, incisive wit, and incredible humility.
Awesome. Where can people subscribe?
Wherever they normally get their podcasts, from Apple, Google, Spotify, the MPN website, or just visit my website at thefuelpodcast.com.
You heard him. Go subscribe.
Anastasia, welcome to On Brand.
Thank you for having me, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here.
I am excited to chat, especially about cultural intelligence for marketers, which I can't resist making the joke, feels like something that most marketers need. But where do we start with cultural intelligence when it comes to marketing?
Well, I like to start with the present moment, just kind of diagnosing where we are in and why something like cultural intelligence might be really important, particularly in this moment, not only from the perspective of inclusive marketing and using marketing and business for social good, but from the perspectives of the business challenges that marketers are faced with, particularly in this year of heightened polarization, of various anxieties and challenges that are part of our daily work. Cultural intelligence really offers marketers a new framework for thinking what it might mean to engage in work that's more culturally relevant and give some concrete definitions and ideas about how marketers might engage culture from the perspective of their brand and their specific category.
That's such a great point, and you kind of set the stage for us with where we're at with heightened polarization, and I think a mistaken perception would be, yikes, it's so dangerous out there, we should kind of keep our head in the sand. But that is increasingly not working either. So it seems like people need to engage. But how can we best get started as marketers thinking about things from a cultural perspective?
I am a researcher by training, and so I'm a very big believer in relying on data and relying on data to help us understand what the consumers that we are serving expect of us, what they want, and what they will ultimately resonate with. And that part of integrating cultural research into market research processes, not as an afterthought, but as a core of this process, is something that I care about deeply in my work and with clients that I service. That's where we should start. Obviously, in the last 3 years, brands have been, in many cases, rightfully so, accused of performativity, of appropriation, of doing things for the sake of it, to the point of where now we are in this broader discourse of the future of purpose. Is purpose dead? And if purpose for purpose's sake is not very meaningful or commercially effective, then what's next? Um, my answer to that is that we have to go back to understanding the audiences that we serve and understanding the kind of perspectives, lived experiences, cultural nuances that we might have missed without that lens of being conscious of these differences and these nuances in the kind of work we produce.
So, who do you find yourself as you talk about brands purpose with purpose for purpose sake? Who do you find yourself kind of talking about a lot and maybe shaking your head at, I can't believe they did that?
That's a good question. I try to focus on mostly positive examples of the brands that are doing it right. Obviously, we could talk about Bud Light, but that example is so overused at this point that I almost am inclined to think that it's kind of a confirmation bias, that whenever we see a brand that didn't get it right, we say, okay, purpose isn't working and we should abandon it and go back to being entertaining and funny, which obviously are a very important part of resonating with consumers. But I think I just personally stay away from focusing too much on the negative examples. Precisely because of this reason. In my work, I am trying to get marketers to see how inclusive, culturally relevant, and purpose driven marketing can be effective. So I am focusing on a lot of examples, and that should inspire marketers to be a little bit more courageous and to tap into things that they might be initially intimidated by.
You said confirmation bias, and I'm like, you did warn us. You said researcher by trade, so confirmation bias
That's
is
right.
is going to come up. So, what about the other side? Potentially, the other side of the confirmation bias uh, of 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 someone that is doing a great job, the opposite of Bud Light.
Well, I have plenty of examples, and obviously none of them are perfect, right?
Right.
Marketers, I like to think about brands as not just some abstract entities, but like our colleagues who are making decisions day to day. But there are a couple of examples that really excite me. For example, the work that Hinge, the dating app, is doing with Gen Z right now. They have recently launched a initiative to battle the epidemic of loneliness among young people. I find that to be such an interesting way to speak to real experiences, concerns of younger generation, while still staying within sort of the broader category of social connection and speaking to Gen Z beyond the topic of dating and romantic connections. So Hinge is doing very exciting work, in my opinion, putting money behind this initiative, bringing young consumers together to create these, now extinct third spaces of connection for younger people. I also recently was traveling and using Lyft a lot, and I have read about their, I believe it's called Women Plus initiative, where essentially uh, female customers or non-binary customers, where possible, would get connected to female drivers. And I took Lyft during that trip, and I didn't get to um, have a driver of the same gender as me, but it was a moment of connection with the brand where I opened the app, got a notification, and felt very seen as somebody who has to travel and have considerations for my safety. So those are two examples that I'm thinking about that really do understand the consumer experience and the customer journey, and speaking to those experiences in what I find to be a quite cultural compelling way.
That's such a great point and a powerful example, and also important context too. Like you said, I think I might have inadvertently imposed a false binary of who's getting it right and who's getting it wrong, and I think that that's kind of the danger in the landscape today. And I think we're so afraid of being on the list, on someone's bad list, that we uh, lead to really just not acting at all.
Mhm. I think you're totally right. And, as marketers um, in the space, I think we have to normalize the feelings that we have. Going to market is a vulnerable experience in itself. You're putting out creative ideas in front of consumers. Um, we care about this profession, the kind of work that we put out. And obviously, when there is a certain desire to get it right, specifically around some of these issues that can be seen as contentious, it's only normal that marketers might feel intimidated or might not have resources. That's why I wrote the book, is to offer marketers that I talk to on a daily basis some resources, some starting points to set them off in their own work. And at the same time, I think we can't give ourselves a pass, and we need to hold ourselves accountable to say it is reasonable and understandable to be intimidated, to feel the fear. But at the end of the day, when we look at data, we see that inclusive advertising performs better. Marketing that speaks to diverse segments of society performs and does better and resonates with our consumers. And so it's our professional responsibility at the end of the day to take that data and do something with it.
That's such a good point on kind of connecting the dots with the data too. And you talk about how complex it is to go to market today. And in thinking about that, where does, as we kind of look at the Venn diagram of this show and thinking about who we are as a brand, how do those insights of who you are and what you stand for align with your brand's cultural intelligence?
Mm. I love that question. I think it's so important. In my view, we should be moving away from any understanding of brands' role in culture as kind of saviors. It's a
Yeah.
common example recently that I've heard in marketing circles that a mayonnaise should be not responsible for saving the world. And somebody who cares deeply about inclusive marketing and culturally intelligent marketing, I agree. We should not impose certain social responsibilities on brands that have nothing to do with it. And perhaps is that something that's not relevant to their category. But we can think about brands' identity and brands' positioning as always implicated in certain social issues and questions of representation, simply because brands produce mass media and brands go to market with representation of social life, of human experiences. So even if a brand as such might not necessarily have a direct relationship to certain political issues or and so forth, there's always a question of how is the brand experience, the universe that we are constructing for the consumers and putting in front of them, how is it representative of their experiences and the nuances of the cultural communities they come from, things that speak to them, things that are particular? Are we being responsible and representative? So, in that sense, any brand, I think, should care deeply about cultural intelligence, even if purpose as such is not the best business decision for that brand specifically.
On Brand will be right back after this.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Keith Smith hosts a great podcast called The Fuel Podcast. Keith, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Fuel is all about the advertising business. It's like Mad Men for the ears. Every show, I pick on a hot topic to discuss or interview a celebrity from the world of British and American advertising. We chat about all sorts of things, and I try and uncover the real person behind the image using just my powerful charm, incisive wit, and incredible humility.
Awesome. Where can people subscribe?
Wherever they normally get their podcasts, from Apple, Google, Spotify, the MPN website, or just visit my website at thefuelpodcast.com.
You heard him. Go subscribe. You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the Boys Club of Advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
Now, back to the show. So I want to talk a bit about your work as senior insights lead at Reddit. Now we'll play that annoying relative at a family holiday of what does a senior insights lead do?
Essentially, what I've just described, Nick, my job is to understand audiences and the conversations they're having. We are interested in really using the data to help our clients make intelligent decisions about where to show up, but also how to show up and how to be part of the conversations that communities are having in an organic way. So a lot of my time day to day is spent with audience data, with conversation data, trying to understand where the communities are relevant to our clients exist on the platform, what conversations are happening there, and what are some of the insights and thought starters for creative activations that we can offer our clients to make their campaigns most successful and also most resonant.
That is such a great point. So in talking about that specifically, with brands with engaging with Reddit, what does that look like?
Well, we are a community of communities, as we say. There is a place for everybody at Reddit. And in my day-to-day work, I work on a variety of topics, from looking into communities where people are coming to discuss how to parent better. I look into communities where folks are talking about finding the right shade range for their particular skin tone. We work in looking at the communities that are trying to find the best credit card that will give them the most points. The beauty of Reddit in that sense is it is a space that sits at the intersection of search and social, where people come looking for answers related to their lived experiences and day-to-day life that fall quite neatly with the kind of products and services that brands offer. So it's a kind of organic space for brands to show up, particularly in this moment where there is a rising skepticism towards influencers and influencer marketing, where consumers feel marketed to. So that's the most exciting part about my work and the seed that I have.
So I want to talk a bit about your book as well, and I'm sure that the easy answer is everything that you've been talking about, from audience insights, data, and cultural intelligence, kind of comes together in this book. But writing a book is, as someone who's done it a couple of times, is a big undertaking, and it's material that you're spending a lot of time with. So, usually it's in response to, I need to bring this book into existence, or this is a book that's needed. So say more about what got you into the book lane, if you will, on the topic of cultural intelligence.
Absolutely. As I hinted, and I guess as was revealed in my bio, I'm a former academic and I'm trained in cultural studies. My doctorate is in American cultural studies with specific focus on issues of race, gender, sexuality. And it so happened that I decided to leave academy right around 2019, 2020. And it was such an interesting moment for me as I wanted to transition into cultural strategy to observe marketers asking a lot of questions about identity, about how communities form a sense of belonging, how audiences think about brands and cultural and social issues. And so my inspiration for writing the book was to say, well, there are quite a few frameworks and way of thinking about culture that I think are going to be helpful to my colleagues in marketing and to the clients that we work with. And so the book really came from that desire to share some of the forms of knowledge that are usually not accessible to business, really break them down and really make them applicable to the challenges and questions that a marketer would be asking in their day-to-day life. So cultural intelligence for marketers is really a way to say, or invite marketers into this experience where they don't have to spend hours and hours going to the library, trying to find books, trying to watch YouTube videos, and find the information that would help them, but it's hopefully packaged all here in one book.
I love that. So, somewhat counterintuitive to that of, if this is where someone's at, they need to absolutely go and get the book. But I'm a fan of simplicity, and when we unpack complex topics like cultural intelligence here on the podcast, I'm a big fan of asking if someone's listening, thinking, "Oh, we've been like that ostrich with our head in the sand. We need to do something different." What's one thing that you would give listeners to do differently on this topic that they can go do today or start thinking about today?
I strongly believe that as marketers, when we think about researching culture and our audiences, we need to start moving away from just focusing on the kind of fleeting trends that are populating the headlines and are oftentimes capturing our attention. So I often talk or joke rather about, even having a hard time to remember what trend, whether it was girl dinner, girl math, tomato makeup, that is capturing the attention of marketers who are trying to find that opportunity that would be relevant to their brand. And so cultural intelligence is really inviting marketers to start thinking about cultural research and analysis as an ongoing practice of differentiating between these fleeting trends that are might be on in the headlines for 72 hours but are not actually drivers of consumer behavior. So all that is to say, where we should start, in my view, is to start thinking about fast culture and slow culture and structuring our research accordingly, where we are able to be a little bit nuanced and more precise about what constitutes a trend and what trends actually drive the consumer expectations and need within our particular category, and the other, I don't even want to call them trends, but I guess signals that just might be trending in a particular niche community.
That's such a great point and a great way to think about all of this too. And as you were talking about some of the different trends, it did make me smile, and it is my pleasure to get to ask you for a brand that has made you smile recently.
What a good question. There are many, as I mentioned. I try to focus on positive examples, but one that sticks out that I just saw yesterday is a current campaign by Coca-Cola that is adopting unauthorized street art of the Coca-Cola brand or the Coca-Cola bottle in its marketing campaign under the messaging of every Coca-Cola is welcome. I might be paraphrasing and not getting it exactly right, but what I love about this campaign and why it put a smile on my face when I saw it was that this is such a clever way to signal to the brand's global impact while integrating the artifacts from the cultural communities in a way that is playful, that is welcoming, that is not seen as threatening to brand's visual identity and the brand's legacy, but also such an interesting play on inclusivity. To say every Coca-Cola is welcome, is included, to me is a smart way to signal brands' values without being performative or kind of in your face with messages of diversity and inclusion that almost come across as trying too hard to appear inclusive. So that's a campaign that I really like and looking forward to reading a little bit more about it. I find it fascinating and one of the examples of what it means to produce culturally relevant marketing.
Well, that's a great smile, and I don't know why I should be surprised or expect anything different, but I love when there is, pun alert, an on-brand brand that has made you smile. So I think that fits very much with the conversation that we've been unpacking here this week on the show. Anastasia, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
Folks are welcome to find me on LinkedIn. I curate a small community of 18,000 professionals and am most active on LinkedIn when I try to curate a conversation about the topics we discussed today, as well as normalize conversations about unpopular topics, or as we talked about, topics that might intimidate marketers. So that's where you can find me on socials, and my website, culturalintelligenceformarketers.com, also has a little bit more information about the book, where to get it. So my DMs are open. I'm always very eager to hear from folks who might want to reach out.
Awesome. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes, which folks can find at onbrandpodcast.com. Anastasia, thank you for being on brand with us.
Thank you, Nick. This was a total pleasure, and I appreciate your time.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Keith Smith hosts a great podcast called The Fuel Podcast. Keith, tell us what these fine folks will get out of listening.
Fuel is all about the advertising business. It's like Mad Men for the ears. Every show, I pick on a hot topic to discuss or interview a celebrity from the world of British and American advertising. We chat about all sorts of things, and I try and uncover the real person behind the image using just my powerful charm, incisive wit, and incredible humility.
Awesome. Where can people subscribe?
Wherever they normally get their podcasts, from Apple, Google, Spotify, the MPN website, or just visit my website at thefuelpodcast.com.
You heard him. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.